Ladies and gentlemen, we have with us today the unabashed cat lady, Khaleila Wright. So, thank you very much for coming on. I'll give the audience a chance to give you a round of applause. Awesome. So, again, thanks for coming on. Before we get into your writing, why don't you just tell me a little bit about yourself? Who is Khaleila? Where are you from? What do you like to do? All that kind of good stuff.
Well, I'm a practicing Gaulish polytheist, and I also foster feral kittens. There is one in the office attacking me as we speak. I have a master's in economics from Washington State University, and I actually taught college level econ for quite a few years. It was in that capacity that I was first introduced to publishing because I was roped into being the creative writing club advisor for the Spokane Falls Community College Creative Writing Club. Um, so that's sort of where I got, my feet wet in publishing because I had to help with the school anthology. Now I work full time for the United States Census Bureau. I write feature articles and columns as a freelancer. I occasionally create political cartoons for regional news outlets. I founded the Palouse Writers Guild, which is a nonprofit service organization whose goals are bringing professional development to authors, championing indie book sales, and helping self-publishers navigate the business side of writing. And then I did found my own publishing house in 2021.
Wow, I feel like you deserve another round of applause after all that, but I'll hold out for just a minute.
Okay.
So I did see your publishing house. So the Heart and Hind Publishing House. That's really cool. Immediately, what jumps out to me is the deer and the ass. Is that correct, or what does Heart and Hind mean?
Okay, so heart is an archaic word for stag, so deer. And then
Mhm.
hind is the female version of a
Oh,
deer. So it's
I
basically
did
buck
not
and
know that.
doe, but archaic words. Yeah.
All right, well there I go, just making an ass of myself. So,
That's
so
okay.
you, yeah.
I
So
do play
you,
with that. Sorry.
no, go ahead. I
My
think there's a little bit
newsletter
of
is
lag, but
called the
it's
hind end. So we do play with that being, we can all be an
okay.
ass.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. So do you publish anybody other than yourself for this, or tell me a little bit about the house?
So far I've only published myself, but I am working with the Priest River Library, who did get a grant to do sort of a walking book. I don't know if you're familiar with those, but there are going to be panels around town, and I will be publishing the book that goes with those panels. So that will be my first other author other than myself. And I do want to expand and do more authors as well, but there's only so much I can do, just being myself
Hmm.
and just starting out. It'll take a while to grow into a bigger house.
Yeah, and that makes sense. But ideally, if you could see yourself taking off in the next 10 years or something, what kind of works would you like to publish?
I'm really interested in fantasy. That's mostly what I write. Anything with sort of a pagan interest. So, if I had somebody who wrote nonfiction but was like an herbalist, I have a friend who does medicinal herbs. He's a botanist from WSU or retired now. Um, so a book from him would be something that I would be interested in. So, you know, it would be an eclectic mix, just like me.
Hmm. Yeah, I feel like most authors are the same way. There's no way you can put each of us into a box because we like so many different things, and that's cool because it brings like a different perspective to all of our writing to bring in all these different, let's call them practices or something like that. Um, why don't you tell me now about your favorite fantasy novel? Because we've talked about fantasy a couple times, and I'm a huge fan of fantasy. So where do you get your inspiration from your writing?
I read a ton. I'm a big fan of Goodreads, so I track all of my reading too. I read like 100 books a year. So my biggest, like, I love Diana Gabaldon and the Outlander series, so I'm waiting on the next book from that. I also love Sarah Maas with the Court of Thorn and Roses series. I like the fantasy combined with a bit of romance. That's really exciting. But the one book that I really found inspiring was actually Stephen King's On Writing. It was his memoir. And he was just so relatable and so encouraging that I really love that book, and I encourage all writers to read it.
And I've heard that from 20 people by now, and I've still never read it. So it's my own fault that I never got around to it. If you could pick out one point from it that was really awesome, what would that point be?
One thing that really resonated with me is that he talked about writing at a child-sized desk in the laundry room of his double wide when he was a teacher, a public school teacher, and I was just like, if he can write these amazing stories while cramped at a kid's desk in a laundry room, like there is no excuse for me.
Hmm.
Like I just need to
Yeah.
sit down and crank them out.
Yeah. And that really is a piece of wisdom that I hear from a lot of successful authors is like, just sit down and do it. Like no one's first novel is going to be amazing, and your first sentence that you ever write is going to be trite. And you just need to sit down and do it, and you'll hone your craft as you crank out 10,000 hours. Like don't even think about being good until you've done 10,000 hours of writing, not 10,000 pages, 10,000 hours of writing. So yes, just sit down and do that. All of my audience can appreciate that wisdom, I'm sure. So we all love fantasy here. Why do you prefer writing in the fantasy genre? What about that calls to you?
For the same reason I enjoy reading fantasy is it's escapism. I mean, your normal life is pretty boring or pretty mundane or pretty traumatic depending on what's going on at the time, right? And you just want to escape. And so fantasy, reading and writing is a way to escape into other worlds that can be more interesting or more enjoyable. If I'm having a bad day at work, I can make my characters be nice when I can't make my coworkers, you know? So there's
Hmm.
all of these other things that go into it that's just more of a relaxing, I guess, really an escape from reality that we have to live a day to day.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, and you can also write your mean coworkers in and just kill them off. That's
To
fun
kill
too.
them, exactly.
So tell me a little bit about your plot for your novel.
So basically, skilled sex worker exchanges life as a tavern wench for job as a huntress and ultimately finds herself in the service of a king.
I like how
So
you
that
had that just condensed down into an elevator pitch immediately. I need to do that for my novels. Um, okay, awesome. And so I did see that you unabashedly refer to your main character as a village whore. So why do you
yes.
give your main character such a polarizing profession? And what role does sex play in the novel?
Actually, sex plays a huge role in the novel, especially consent, as well as the difference between sex as a vocation and sex as an avocation. So a lot of times with fantasy tropes, our hero or heroine is sort of the lowest of the lows. We've got the reluctant hero, we've got Harry Potter under the stairs. Like these are people that nobody thinks about. And honestly, when you read a lot of fantasy, you notice that female characters tend to be lacking, especially in the leads. I mean, it's becoming less and less of a problem now, with Diana Gabaldon's work and Sarah Mass's work. You get more of those strong female leads. But that's where I was coming from. I mean, who is sort of the overlooked person in society? And, the one most likely to be shunned and ignored and abused in the time period that I was working with was probably the village whore.
Hmm. Okay. So would you say that this is a story of empowerment for her?
Absolutely. Her character arc changes so much over the course of the novel, where she goes from being taken advantage of by other people to really being in control of her own destiny and of her body by the end.
Hmm. Okay, awesome. Did you ever read it was the Earth's Children series by Jean Auel. And it
Oh,
wasn't
yes.
yeah, it wasn't fantasy, but it was definitely like placed thousands and thousands of years ago with the cavemen. For people who are unfamiliar with it, I think it started with like Clan of the Cave Bear, and then there was like
The Plains of
oh
Passage,
gosh.
Valley of the Horses. Yeah,
Yes,
I
all
read them
those. So
all.
you are familiar with them. Awesome.
Yes.
I read those in high school. And, I feel like when I got into the second book, because there's like a rape scene in the first book in Clan of the Cave Bear. And then I remember getting into the second book and being like, wow, there's a lot of sex in this. And I was like, 14 at the time. I was like, give me more. Like, just let me read them all. So would you say that your novel is maybe borderline smut and that you're playing out these fantasies, or are you really just trying to convey a message with in regards to sex with your novels?
Um, it definitely is not borderline smut. There's not as much sex as you would think in it for the fact that the main character is a whore. I mean, we definitely, or, I definitely have sex scenes in there, but those sex scenes are to propel the course of the novel. So, I have Clara acting as a whore, engaging in sex for work, but I also have her flirting with the idea of entering into a romantic relationship and how that would change her view of sex. So while there is sex in the novel, it's not so much of a smut read, but it's definitely there.
Hmm. Okay, gotcha. I also noticed in your back of the book, so to speak, you have reference to an unhelpful wizard. So I
Yes.
like that phrase, and it gives a little bit of humor into that. So tell me a little bit about how humor plays a role in your novel.
Well, I was a Boy Scout leader for many years. A lot of my book I sort of think of as what would a 50 miler be like if I let the boys have beer and whores. And boys
Sign
can
me
come up with
up.
a lot of ways to be helpful and unhelpful at the same time. And so that's sort of where my wizard comes from. Plus, as a practicing pagan, a lot of people think of witches and wizards um, in that respect as well as a religious aspect. But when you read in fantasy, these are like these all powerful, all encompassing people. And when I'm talking to, fellow pagans, we're like, those people are not due the respect that they are given. They're probably half stoned most of the time. So between the ways boys can be helpfully unhelpful and the fact that wizards just generally aren't due all the respect we give them, that's how I came up with Wayward.
Okay. You bring up an interesting point because you did mention that you're a practicing pagan. So I'm curious how that plays into your writing of this fantasy world, and if you interjected things into this fantasy world that you truly believe in our world, or like tell me about the magic system. Like how does all of this tie together?
So I actually have in Clara's journey my favorite goddess, which is Abnoba. She's a Gaulish goddess. There's hardly anything known about her. She has like 7 inscriptions all in the Black Forest. It's um, hardly known at all. So I did include things that, are definitely from this world, but this is also fantasy. So, I do have this Gaulish goddess that I have all of my characters worshiping, but I also have my regularly stoned wizard. And I have demons, and I incorporated a lot of things that people think are pagan that actually, well, I guess they're pagan, but they're not historically accurate. So, like the tree calendar, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but Robert Graves invented what he called the Celtic tree calendar, and it's based on 13 supposed lunar cycles, each assigned a different tree. He created it in the mid 1900s, maybe even as late as 1970. So there's no historical accuracy in it at all. But a lot of pagans, especially in the modern New Age movement, adhere to it. So I threw that in there as well. So there's a lot of things where I'm weaving paganism into the story. Um, Sometimes in a fantasy aspect, sometimes in that real aspect.
Hmm. Okay. And again, in regards to magic specifically, how do people cast magic? Is it like an innate force within the world, or is it a power that they hold within themselves, or do they, you mentioned demons, are they warlocks and they call on these demons for aid? Like how does this work?
Um, no, demons are mercenaries in my world. You can pay them to do anything, but but um, I reserve, sort of that magic for the gods. So gods and goddesses can basically move mountains, control the seasons, the solar cycles, all of that. So a lot of times I have magic reserved for the gods. I do allow my wizards to use magic because they were given it in my world from the gods in order to help shepherd mortals. So I don't have mortals using magic. I will have them like, you're supposed to contact the druid to call on the aid of the gods, and then the gods will provide the magic.
Hmm. Okay, cool. Going back to themes a little bit, I know we talked extensively on sex. What other kinds of themes do you have in the book?
Okay. Well, like a lot of fantasies, that there is the quest, right? She's definitely moving across the continent in order to get from one place to another. Let's see, what are my other, women's empowerment? I think a lot of times, um, people take for granted or even maybe don't consider that women are slaves to their own biology. And so,
Hmm.
because my character is a sex worker, she has to be really aware of her menstrual cycle.
Hmm.
And how did women prevent pregnancy in the Iron Age? And so I actually ended up doing a lot of research on different herbs that would actually start menses or would induce abortions or all sorts of things because women had to do that. In the area that I have it set, or the time period, there were women warriors. It's written about in Herodotus. So there's a lot of things where women just had to be responsible for their bodies and more aware of it than we consider today.
Hmm. Awesome. Yeah, that's a lot of insight that you're bringing into that men don't necessarily think about, and maybe even women because they're not living that life today, the life of a Iron Age whore, as you said. So piggybacking off the research aspect that you were just talking about, what are your writing habits like? Like, how many hours do you write a day? How long does it take you to push out a novel? And tell me a little bit about that.
At first, it was easy to push out a novel because that's all I was writing was a novel. But basically, my writing habits involve a candle, coffee or tea, and like I try to get in 2 hours of mostly cat-free writing. I do have cardboard boxes in my office. There's one right up there, and it's labeled Fort Asshole. So that hopefully they will sit in the cardboard box and not on the keyboard. Um, at the beginning, like I said, it was way easier to write a novel when that's all I was working on. But now I have to send out press releases and I have to write blog posts and I have to do a newsletter. And so there's all these other things that take away from the writing. So it's actually taking me longer to write the second book, which I'm down to just
Mm.
proofreading now, than it did to write the first book. Like I had my first draft out of the first book in 3 months. I mean, it was wonderful. I mean, it was crap and it needed a lot of editing. um, but like I said, I used to teach and I just sat down one summer and wrote a novel. And there is no way I could do that now with all of the other writing that has to be done to support an author's life.
Hmm. Yeah. And, I feel like every single author that I speak to that is self-published or in your case has their own publishing house, and I've spoken to a couple authors with their own publishing houses as well, is that the recurring theme is that being an author is not just writing for 3 hours a day and then drinking margs on the beach the rest of the time. You're a business owner all wrapped up into this. You're doing your marketing and your cover and you're doing interviews and like you said, newsletters. And so don't come into this thinking that it's going to be all nice and easy. What would you say is one of the biggest things that caught you off guard administratively?
Well, I have the benefit of having a degree in economics because I used to teach college economics. So the administrative side, I was actually really prepared for. So I hired a lawyer to get my trademark and I was able to do my own copyright registration and all of the business things actually went really well for me. For me, the hardest thing was editing and connecting with editors. And because I'm not I don't have an MFA. I'm not a writer. I mean, I write, of course, and I have published a novel, but that's not what I went to college for. So for me, learning all of the steps that go into editing was actually what caught me off guard because you write your first draft and then you're like, okay, I'll do some self edits, maybe proofread. And then I was like, no, this still isn't good. Like there is a lot of work to do here. So Learning about the difference between a developmental edit and the line edit and a copy edit and a proofread and why you need all of those things. That's what caught me off guard more than any of the business aspect.
Hmm. Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks for those insights. And just a note to anyone who's reading, who's listening. You referred to yourself as not a writer, but I think you're clearly a writer. You have these books that you've put out, and I don't want you to get down on yourself and think you didn't go to school for it. Because I mean, like, I went to school for English, and I still don't have a novel out. So you're doing better than I am.
Well, thank you.
Uh-huh. Yeah, just a word of encouragement to anyone else that's listening. I like to encourage people to write their stuff and get it out there for people to read. Everybody's got a little bit of creativity in them, and I think the world would be a better place if everybody showed that off a little bit. And speaking of the creativity, are you ready to read an excerpt of your novel?
I am. I got two options for you. One that will come in at 8 minutes and 20 seconds, or one that comes in at 4 minutes, 28 seconds.
Let's keep it at 4:28.
All right. So this is from chapter 1. Okay. And this is Clara and Wayward, who is my unhelpful wizard. The tavern had emptied, and Clara was sweeping up when Wayward returned, floating in on a cool breeze, and ordered another ale. She felt him watching her as she cleaned and Sarek counted the money in the cash box. Once she had finished and put the broom away, she went to sit opposite him. Not many men sit at an empty tavern. I was hoping we could talk privately, Wayward said. We can do anything you want privately, Clara replied, but it all costs money. Really, I'd just like to talk, Wayward insisted. At that moment, Sarek shouted across the room, Clara, be sure he leaves. I don't want any trouble like we had before. And make sure he pays. Then Sarek disappeared out the back door, heading for home. Wayward sighed and reached for his purse. How much? Clara told him, and he reluctantly parted with the silver. She rose, intending to lead him to the room and back. That's not necessary, Wayward said. Here is fine. Puzzled, Clara wondered just what this man was after, but consented to sit opposite him again. My sister sent me for you, Wayward began. Clara cut him off with a sharp wave of her hand. If that's what you're after, the price is double. Threesomes, foursomes, and moresomes all cost extra. This would be her first brother-sister combo, and there was no way she was going to do it for the regular price. Wayward coughed and cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. We are seeking a cook, not a whore? Oh, Clara said, her hands dropping to the table. I just thought. She paused, then added forcefully, You still have to pay. Sarek won't believe you just wanted to talk. That's fine. Keep the money, Wayward said, seeming somewhat relieved. A party of Keltoi will pass this way around Beltane. They are traveling to their homeland in the Abnoba Mountains and need someone who can cook and hunt. My sister says you're capable of both. If you've been the one preparing my meals, I can vouch for your cooking. Beltane was still moons away. The Skoltae did not celebrate Belenus or observe his holy days. The only thing they worshipped was their horses. Why not wait to hire a cook until they were ready to travel? She shook her head. They likely expected more from a hired cook than just cooking. So you want me to cook and hunt? Clara scoffed. And at every village we pass through, I'll get hired out as a whore. Makes for a handy way to finance your journey. I'd still have to endure as much feasting, fighting, and fornicating as I do here. Plus, I'd be sleeping rough and dog-tired after a long day of walking. I do not expect that will be the case, Wayward said. They are looking for someone to sign on as an equal in the company, not as a whore. You would share in the cooking, hunting, and other chores just as the other members of the party will. It seemed prudent to take on another member since there are already 6 in the party, and 7 is a luckier number. And there would be no sex? Clara asked, looking for confirmation. Not unless you want it, Wayward said. Then I expect there would be a number in the party who would be happy to oblige. He was trying to hide a smile, and failing miserably. How do I know this isn't a trap? Clara asked. You could be making this whole story up just to get me to leave here with you. What's your role in all of this? You have no way of knowing if this is entrapment, Wayward agreed. But you won't be riding off with me tonight. If you are agreeable, they'll meet you here. As for my role, I am a wizard enlisted to aid them in their journey. Rather reluctantly, I might add. A wizard seems to be a far-fetched claim, Clara said. She had seen plenty of roadside charlatans in her time at the alehouse, and was never impressed. Wayward held up his flagon, which still held a small measure of ale, and blew across its base. The ale froze, and frost crept up the flagon's side. Then he turned it upside down. Not a drop of liquid fell from the lip. Righting the flagon, Wayward snapped his fingers. The ale was liquid again, and all that remained of the frost was dew-like droplets running down the flagon's side and dripping onto the table. Clara took the flagon from him and considered the ale in silence a moment. She took a sip, then wiped her hand across the back of her mouth, or wiped the back of her hand across her mouth. Well, I suppose it wouldn't hurt to meet them. Wayward smiled and moved the walking stick to the crook of his arm. He proffered his hand. She took it and shook, feeling the calluses on his rough skin. Then she walked him to the door. The man was utterly mad. Was there really a party destined for the Anoba Mountains looking for a cook? That seemed almost as unfathomable as his claim to be a wizard. Still, the trick with the ale was impressive, and traveling to the goddess's home was bound to be more interesting than working for Sarek.
Awesome. That was funny. I liked that. You had some good quip in there. I have to ask, do you draw from any of your characters? I mean, obviously we draw from all of our characters from ourselves, but I guess which character do you most relate with as you're writing?
Well, my critique group calls me Clara when I'm being obstinate, so there's that. But I think I draw more from my children. Definitely, I've got a pair of brothers that bicker just like my boys.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Yeah, so now you get to be surrounded with people that are doing the quick back and forth so you can throw it into your writing. I like that. Great. Well, do you have any parting words before I let you go?
I just like to encourage everybody to try and find like a writing support group. I see a lot of people online who are like, oh, where can I get feedback for this? Or where can I meet with a writing group? I would just say, talk to your library. Your local library is a wealth of resources. They probably know who the local writers are in the community, and they can connect you. If not them, check out a local indie bookstore, because they're going to have a lot of self-published writers coming in saying, hey, can you sell my book? So they would also be a resource to get you connected with writing groups in the area to help you enrich your own writing.
Awesome. Well, Khaleila, thank you so much and have a good evening.
All right, thank you. Bye.